Well, good afternoon, and I want to tell you that it's a great honor for the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, to be able to bring to you in Oshkosh an AirVenture 2006, one of only two flying Lancasters in the world. And we haven't been here in 17 years, and we thought it was time. And we were able to do that through the great cooperation from the EAA in Oshkosh and also the EAA in the Canadian chapters in Alberta and Nanton, which is has a tent right behind us, and they were able to fundraise and help us fly this airplane here. It only uses about 240 gallons an hour, so and that's not to say anything about the maintenance. So, but we're also honored not only to be here, but to be able to bring with us 5 veterans who flew Lancasters in World War II. And these gentlemen are here today. I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one of them, and I'm going to obviously give them a chance to say a few things, and also they'll be available to answer any questions you might have of them. And I want to say that this effort has been a big undertaking for us, and the cooperation of these gentlemen to make this come true has been very much appreciated by us. So without further ado, I'm going to just start on our left. One of our co-captains flying the Lancaster today is our chief pilot at the museum, Captain Gary Schroeder from Fergus, Ontario. And so welcome, Gary. And he can tell you what it's like flying a Lancaster 60 some odd years later. Our first veteran is Flying Officer Joe English. I'm just going to put this book, if you take the black part, I'll take the paper underneath, thanks. Flying Officer Joe English was a pilot, joined the RCAF in October of 42 in Regina, Saskatchewan. And if you want to know what the American equivalent of Regina is, it's Wichita. Okay. It's on the road to nowhere, and it's colder than hell in the winter. So he did his pilot training in Regina on Tiger Moss, and then went to the Service Flight Training School in Brandon, Manitoba, where he trained on Cessna crane T-50 cranes, receiving his RCAF wings in November of 43. Was posted overseas at Liverpool in April of 44, and trained on Oxfords in England, and then went to Wellingtons, or the Wimpy bomber, Wimpies as they called them affectionately, right, Joe? And was mated with his crews. Then went into 4-engine conversion on Halifax bombers, and then eventually to Lanc finishing school, joining 625 Squadron in Kelstern, England, and then when that base was condemned, you moved to Scrampton, England. Joe completed 30 operational missions on Lancasters. Following his operational tour, he also flew the Lancaster on 2 mana drops, one into The Hague, dropping food, and one into Rotterdam, dropping food, before being repatriated to Canada and attending University of Manitoba, and became a professional architect in Edmonton, Alberta. Thank you, Joe. We're glad you're here. Our next gentleman is Dr. Robert Hanna, and Bob, as we call him. He wanted to join the Air Force. He was born in St. Catharines, Ontario. He wanted to join the Air Force in April of 41, but he didn't have the prerequisite education at the time, and I don't mean this as a slight to the Army, but the Army accepted him. So he went to, yeah. He went to the 10th Battery in St. Catharines, where after a year of service, he was able to join the Air Force. And he was in the stream to become a fighter pilot. He went to 9 Elementary Flight Training School in St. Catharines on Tiger Moth aircraft. And then he went to the Service Flight School in Elmer, where he got his wings on Harvards, or what we call Harvards, but what you call Texans. And then he was posted overseas, and went basically to advanced flying unit at Stratford-on-the-Avon, and flew Oxfords, which was similar to a T-50 aircraft. Did some other training, beam courses and things like that. Then he went on to 18 AFU at Smithers Field, where he was at Snitters Field, where he was assigned to Wellingtons and picked up his crews. Then he went on to a heavy conversion unit on Stirling's at 653 heavy conversion unit. From there, he was posted to 514 Squadron and went to Lancaster conversion and was posted eventually to 115 Squadron, where he flew on Lancasters. He completed operations on Lancasters in August of '44. He completed 28 operational missions. When you get a chance to talk to Bob, he has his mission operation map from his 15th mission, which was a mission to downtown Berlin. And it's quite an exciting mission. And he has the actual map and briefing of that mission, and he'd certainly be able to discuss and show you that. It's very interesting. They didn't have GPS, I can tell you that. And then he also, after completing the missions, he did 2 mana drops into Hague, and then he also went into France and Juvincourt, France, and he brought home our POWs from France and brought one load of 24 POWs back in Lancaster and back into England. And he said that was one of the more precious trips he did, because he said after you survived the POW experience, he said if you're sitting in the back, you didn't want some young pilot to crash now and end your wartime experience coming home. So, but we're very glad to have Dr. Hanna. After the war, he came back and went to dentistry school at the University of Toronto and retired as a dentist a few years ago. I tried to memorize all this, but I've got a good memory, but it's short. Our next honored guest is Flight Lieutenant Chris Parr, DFC DFM, who joined the British Air Force as a volunteer reserve in August of '37 to train as a reserve pilot. Chris was called out automatically for wartime when the war broke out in September of '39 and was sent to France to serve until that time in Dunkirk. And he was in the Dunkirk evacuation of the European continent. And he flew Blenheims, and they did autographs fields, they did leaflet drops and other missions like that. And Chris will tell you a little bit about the progression, because Chris was in the war from 1939 to 1945 as a pilot. He, following the breakout of war, he came back to England in Bomber Command, serving in many capacities, and completed 2 operational tours, 58 sorties, and during which he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and the DFM and the Air Efficiency Award. The remainder of time was spent on administration, instructing, and additional training and respite in Canada, and also trying to raise funds for the war by the war bond effort back home. He served on 4 squadrons, flying Blenheims, Hamptons, and Lancasters. At the conclusion of the war, while waiting discharge, they tried to talk him into going to finishing school for senior officers, and he declined and repatriated to Canada. And we're glad you did, Chris, and we're glad you're here. Thank you. Okay. The next gentleman is Warrant Officer Eric Grove, and he is the only flying NCO pilot that we have in the group here. And Eric was born in London, England, educated in London and Kent. He was in survey and building studies when the war broke out in 1939. He joined the Royal Air Force. He flew a number of different airplanes to eventually check out on the Lancaster. He was shot down in a Lancaster on the bombing run into Berlin, and which was his 5th mission. Only 5% of all aircrew shot down in a Lancaster survived. He survived being shot down over Berlin, and not only that, he also then survived a prisoner of war camp for over 2 years. Eric then, after the war, came back to Canada and worked with the Federal Public Service and until he retired in '79. He joined our establishment in 1976, and he coordinates and runs our flow and envelopes program, where we have envelopes of various airplanes stamped by crews that fly them, and runs a very successful program which helps us financially. And he also was helped one of our members who, when we were able to get this airplane in 1988 and help restore it to fly in 1998, he helped Bill Randall quite a bit in that exercise. He flew Tagermoss, Oxfords, Hamptons, Blenheims, Wellingtons, and Lancasters on 166 Squadron. As I said, he was shot down on the 23rd of November '43. And he was after the war ended, he was held prisoner by the Russians until they did an exchange. And the way they exchanged until at the end of the war was 1 for 1. So one Russian being held by the Allies and one Ally being held by the Russians across the Elbe River. So Eric is with us, and we're glad that he was able to get through that experience. Okay. Our last guest of honor, and I want to tell you, I'm really proud of these gentlemen, because you know what the heat was like yesterday, and these guys are troopers. I mean, we've had pretty long days, and you know, they're up early in the morning ready to go before we are, and they're there at 10 o'clock at night having their nightcap, and we're trying to keep up with them. So, but our last gentleman is not a pilot, but he's a gunner, air gunner, and that's Leslie Weeks. And Leslie joined the Royal Air Force in 1941, and he joined as a ground armorer and completed a course to be an armament technician, basically, on Spitfires in 91 Squadron, which was at Hoxkinge, Kent, which was the closest British base to Calais, where the Germans were. He was posted to the Middle East in Egypt in 1942. He worked on Halifax and Wellington bombers. He applied for aircrew status and was trained as an air gunner at El Bala, Egypt. Trained on the Avro Anson, posted to 76 Operational Training Unit on Wellingtons as a tail gunner, converted to the B-24 Liberator, which is behind us, as a mid-upper gunner. Was posted to Italy in 1944, stationed at the East Coast on Amendola on 178 Squadron on the Adriatic Sea. Flew missions as a mid-upper gunner, basically targeting the marshalling and railway yards as the Germans were trying to retreat to northern Italy. They were trying to interfere and make that retreat more difficult. In England, he was posted back to England in 1944, and in December '44, where he was assigned duties as a rear gunner on the Lancaster, and served in that capacity until the end of the war. He flew 21 missions, and an interesting thing about Leslie was when he was 18 years old, living with his family in London, England, one night in September, for those that remember, and I'm sure there's many here that do, but September 7th, 1940 was the first huge bombing of London, England, and it happened about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And on October 1940, at about 1:45 in the morning, Eric's family lived down by the dockyards, which was a target for London, and his home was bombed, and Eric lost his mother and his dad, lost his older brother, his older sister, and younger brother and younger sister, and brother-in-law in that bombing, and he survived that bombing. And basically, at 18 years old, the war changed his life significantly, and he really didn't have a family anymore after that. And so he, in deciding what he wanted to do with his life and where he should go, he joined the RAF subsequent to that. And one thing that Leslie wanted me to tell you was that he didn't do it out of revenge or anything like that. He did it because as a young man, it was something, it was a direction for him to pursue, and so he did that, and we're glad you did, Leslie. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dave, for a great introduction. Go ahead, drip on me. That would be an honor. Gary, give us an overview, what it is like to fly the Lancaster, and tell us a little bit about this airplane. I believe this is one of two, right?
Yeah, that's correct. There's another one that's still part of the Royal Air Force, based in Coningsby, England, and it's still a military airplane. So this is the only civilian registered Lancaster in the world. To fly it, wow, it's the greatest privilege of my career. It's kind of difficult to explain what it feels like, because you feel like there's thousands of others that came before us that are really still up there with us. It's a heavy airplane compared to a lot of the aircraft that'll be here that you'll see at Oshkosh. But you get used to it pretty quick. It's very similar to a DC-3. We say it's like flying the DC-3, only it's meaner. And
Well, you know, four Merlins in close formation here. What a sound. I've never heard anything like it.
yeah, we say it's the most efficient way of turning money into noise. It's extremely noisy. The noisiest airplane I've ever flown with. You cannot communicate without interphones. As soon as the engines are started, you cannot talk to each other. You can't even scream at each other. I mean, that's a good thing.
You know, I'm a very fortunate guy. I'm able to fly the EA's B-17 here, aluminum overcasting. And every place we go, we meet veterans. And it's a very emotional thing for them. They got a tear in their eye, and they want to tell us their story. So without further ado, let's start right down the line here, and let's hear some war stories. Tell us your best war story. Yeah, hold the mic right up at the top there. Yeah, let's hear about what it's like to fly the Lancaster in combat.
Well, the nearest I got to a real serious incident was coming back from a trip to Munich. We were running into a lot of bad weather, and for some reason, our good old Lancaster was eating up petrol like crazy. That's gas, yeah. And so we, as a crew, we had to decide just when we were getting near the French coast whether we should try for England or not. And the engineer, my engineer Jack Mundy, was a real crackerjack at this, and he had us on on the best arrangement of RPM and boost and so on. And we decided that we'd go for England, and we would head for the Manston Airport, which was right on the south coast of England, the nearest auxiliary or what would you call that? The place to land when you're in trouble. That's where we were. So we did. We made it. We didn't have a huge amount of gas left, and they had this
Hold it real close. Yeah.
FIDO. They call it FIDO. Fog intensive dispersal of. That's is that correct? Yeah, FIDO. And that was lit. It was a big string of gas pipes that were lit in case of fog. And we needed that because the front was coming through. We were running out of gas, and the North Sea didn't look very hospitable. So we did get in, and I went over the perimeter track of the edge of the airport at about 200 miles an hour. But it was a big airport, thank God. And if I'd lost my motors at that time, I would have at least glided in anyway. So that was the most exciting thing.
Thank you very much. Pass the mic down. Let's go right down the line here. We know the airplane is a night bomber. That's why it's painted black on the bottom and sort of a dark camouflage on the top. You guys operated at night with one pilot. What's that like? I mean, that's unbelievable.
Before I tell you any experiences, I want to say it's a great pleasure to be able to speak to people that are interested in coming here and honoring us. It's a tremendous thrill. I'd also like to thank the Canadian Warplane Heritage and David Rohr for all the hospitality they've exhibited to us, and the people in the tent from Alberta where Joe got honored by them also, yes. And they've just been wonderful. Now, about flying the Lancaster, I'm just going to tell you this one trip. I've told it several times, but my 15th mission was to Berlin. Well, when you heard the name Berlin, you automatically got sort of wound up. You knew that was going to be a long and probably a difficult trip. Well, the ground crew that was servicing the aircraft that I'd flown in 14 missions, I became very accustomed to this plane, and it was scrubbed because they were changing the exhaust stubs, which they felt weren't restricting the glow enough, and that would make you more vulnerable in the sky. So they got me into an alternate aircraft, and right away, being sort of superstitious, this unnerved me as well as the crew. So we got in the plane and we had trouble getting the port inner started. And they had what they call trolley acts. That's an English way of saying they got a cart full of accumulators or batteries. They have a whole different way of talking. So I said, they're going to bring a cart full of batteries and try to get this thing started. So we got it started, and right away I was late in getting out to the caravan and get the Aldous light to go. There was a plane ahead of me that had just gone slightly off the perimeter track and buried the port wheel in some mud. And they were pulling it out. And I said, oh my God, what the hell else can go wrong? And I haven't even got out to the end of the runway yet. So we finally got airborne, and we climbed up. Our bombing height was 18,000 feet. At 10,000 feet, because these aircraft are supercharged, they have two-stage blowers on them, M and S gear. And I got up to 10,000 feet, which you normally throttle back and put in the S gear of the blower, and it didn't engage. So that means that I'm going to be flying much lower than the altitude prescribed, which is not a good thing either. And we were called a straggler because we were late and we were flying at a lower altitude. So we weren't so far very happy about the trip. We got between Magdeburg and Potsdam on the run into Berlin, and a bright blue white light came on the aircraft, which was a master beam with searchlights. And then the other searchlights came in and coned you there. And that makes you very vulnerable for fighter attacks, flak, and being lower, you're getting all the bombs from the people coming in on top of you. Not a very enviable position. So the only way to get out of this, I dove the thing down to try to get out of the light, which brought me down around 5,000 feet. And I had to reassure the crew that I'm going to eventually pull out. Yeah, that's right. Anyway, there was a terrible thud, and the aircraft was shaking like mad, and a piece of flak had caught the left port wingtip, and later on we discovered it blew off one of the blades of the propeller, which put it out of serious balance, as you can. Yeah. So we were able to get the engine feathered and got in and got the crew settled down. My bombman was nervous. He threw out the window. That strips of tinfoil that we used to jam the radar. Doesn't help you a hell of a lot. The guys coming behind that benefit. But anyway, he would have thrown me out if he could have got me out of the chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we did make it back. safely.
Obviously.
Thank you.
I want to.
So that's. I have the target map, which if anybody's interested in seeing the tactics that are laid down, and we never went directly to the target. You got diverted, and so the fighters would go up and intercept you there, and you go to another city and so on. So if anybody's interested, they might come over and see me later. I have the map. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Before we move on, I want to recognize the reenactors standing behind these gentlemen. Guys, come on up here, front and center. I want everybody to see the authentic RAF gear that these guys have on. And we're also going to give them permission to come out of their uniform of the day a little bit if they want to cool off. But this is all the authentic RAF gear, the fur-lined boots, the beautiful Mae West, the fur-lined jackets and parachutes and so forth. You notice they have the oxygen masks, authentic electrical connectors, the microphones in the mask, and of course the whistle is if you're in the water. This is to signal to your other crew members so you can be picked up. But thank you guys for coming, and we appreciate it. Thank you. Now take those jackets off. I know you're burning up. Dave, I'm going to let you continue if you would.
And thank you, Dan. Now I'd like to ask Flight Lieutenant Chris Parr to say a few words. Chris, as I said earlier, served from 1939 to 1945. So for the entire war effort, Chris was in the Royal Air Force and flew 58 operational missions. Go ahead, Chris.
Are we all right? Well, after that long-winded explanation of what you did, you never did thank me.
That's all I've been doing.
I didn't know.
Keep it short now.
I didn't know what the format was going to be here, so because I can't remember what I had for yesterday morning breakfast, I don't know how I could remember something that happened 65 years ago, particularly if I have suffered from a bit of a syndrome from that war, and I've hesitated to talk about it for many, many, many years. This is my first chance, shall I say. I wrote it all down because of my memory, but also because I'm the only one you'll notice that was quite prepared to put his experience in writing, you know. But again, I had a whole list of comparisons here, but I'll just start with the first one and then tell you a story. At the tender age of 18 then, with adolescent romantic notions of being a knight of the air with white silk scarf flowing past his ears, I was called up and introduced into Bombing Command, and a whole group of nationalities, individual fellows from all over the world, for the formation of Bomber Command, the first Bomber Command. And you got very little time to make friends because the changes were so rapid, so very rapid. But as far as comparing the first and the last, the obvious place to begin is the changing pattern of a bombing sortie from 1940 to 1943-45. In 1940, of course, the individual crews, because of the sparsity of aircraft enemy defenses, weather, etc., that was given later on in briefing, because of that sparsity, each crew was to, although we were given a general direction of route to a target, we planned our own route by simple navigational methods, and we attacked the target, whatever the situation was when we reached it. I'm speaking, of course, of the amount of cloud, whether it was moonlit, and so on. And we also planned our own bombing run. Now, consider that in 1943, January the 17th, my Lancaster aircraft was one of 1,300 that was collected in the skies over England. The mass of aircraft covered an area 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. And of course, with such an armada, I have no other name for it, we had to be told how to fly, where to fly, the course to fly, the height to fly, the speed to fly, the bombing course run over the target, and the precise moment of bombing. This, of course, is obviously to save collisions. It also added that in the first, at the beginning of the war, we were just concerned with night fighters, searchlights, balloons, unheard of later, and anti-aircraft fire, of course. When you get 250 planes over a target at the same time, you're worried about collision, you're worried about slipstreams, you're worried about being bombed from somebody above you, because we were all told which height to fly. There was small time for a young mind to accommodate this in 6 years. Another comparison, of course, which leads me into my story, is the great advancement in communication between ground and air, which developed rapidly with new innovations in the 6 years. Our most reliable form of communication, and I can sense your very skepticism now, is the lowly, or was the lowly carrier pigeon. Now my story. I was flying a Hampden bomber, which is just a twin-engine bomber. We bombing Kiel. Now carrier pigeons were left to the rear gunner to bring on board the aircraft. And before they were brought on the aircraft, these pigeons, I don't know whether any of you are homing pigeon fanciers, but they were hungry. They were not fed for a couple of days, and they were shown their mate with another pigeon to make it jealous.
Sex!
They were put into a cage, and because you may be diverted coming back, and you couldn't land at your own airfield, where there was pigeon loft to cater to pigeons, you might land at an aerodrome where there was no such thing. So they tied a large bag of kernel to the side of the cage to feed them if you were so diverted. Now, the rear gunner, who was supposed to have been briefed about all this, hadn't got a clue. All he knew was that he just had to carry those pigeons on board the aircraft, and he was very responsible for them. So we take off, and we're flying over the North Sea, going to bomb Kiel, and of course, while we were climbing to the height that we wished to attain, the highest, the rear gunner sat in the back. He was also a member of the squadron jazz orchestra, and he played the clarinet. And so he took his clarinet with him on every flight in case he bailed out or he was a prisoner of war. This would give him some form of amusement and entertainment. I'll never forget what he was playing as we climbed to height. I surrender, dear. And we told the son of a bee to shut up and carry on. Now he's over the North Sea, flying in the dark with nothing to do. What do you think he did? Fed the pigeons. Kernel after kernel after kernel. We left Kiel and we're coming home, flying from across Denmark, and we're following the line of the Frisian Isles, which wraps around Holland, Denmark and down. And on the edge of the Frisian Isles was a beacon flashing. So we thought we would shoot up this, strafe this bloody beacon. Down we go, get to about 10,000 feet, and then all hell broke loose. A whole line of searchlights shot up like a wall. A whole line of anti-aircraft fire with tracers shot up like a wall. And we had to fly through this damn thing because there was no way to evade it. We were hit. We were hit in the starboard engine, and we were hit in the transmitter, the receiver, the wireless operator's receiver. Now, the engine's coughing, spluttering, spurting, and it's obvious we're losing height. To cut a long story short, we were losing height, and the decision was, should we fly over to Belgium and land and bail out, or should we try to get back to England? The decision was, or ditch in the sea. The decision was to try and get back to England. Well, of course, we never made it. We ditched in the sea. The aircraft floated for about approximately 3 minutes. The dinghy is released automatically by the sea water. The dinghy comes out. The navigator shouts to the gunner not to forget the bloody pigeons. He brings the pigeons, and to cut long story short, once again, lots of dehydration, lots of difficulty getting the dinghy righted and climbing in wet through. And we're sitting there all alone, you see. Another aircraft, when we fired off the first flares, another aircraft did circle us, and we didn't know. Well, we knew that somebody knew then where we were. But the navigator takes out a pigeon, and on a piece of rice paper, he writes out the crew's name, of course, and the position where we were. This was the original intent of a pigeon, of course, if you were shot down, to let your parents know that you were still safe. Throws the pigeon into the air. It circled twice and came back and sat on the dinghy. He got the second pigeon out and did the same damn thing and threw that one up. Landed on the dinghy. Now the four of us are sitting there with two pigeons. Suddenly, out of a clear blue sky, a little voice says, "They should go home. They're well fed." The navigator, who had the Very pistol to shoot flares into the air, pointed across the dinghy to the gunner and said, "If we don't get picked up, first we eat the pigeons, then we eat you."
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. And now, he's never told that story in the last 4 days that we've been here, but we've heard a lot of good stories. I'd like to introduce Warrant Officer Eric Grove, and as you may remember in my introductory remarks, Eric was shot down on the bombing run into Berlin on his 5th mission.
I can't match Chris's story for humor, but I thought I might tell you something about what it's like to be shot down. And as with Robert, I was on a way to Berlin. This is in November 1943, and it was pretty cold. And I got right to Berlin at 22,000 feet, more or less. And for that reason, I'd done 3 Berlins in 5 nights. Now, Berlin trip was about 6 or 7 hours. So that in 5 nights, I'd done something like 20 flying hours over Germany. I was pretty tired. Anyway, I was early that night. And when we got to Berlin, close to Berlin, between Potsdam and Berlin, it was all dark. And you must realize that flying over enemy territory at wartime, the ground was entirely black. There wasn't a single light anywhere. No vehicles, no houses, no factories, nothing. Everything was dark black. So here we are trying to look down to find out our aiming point on a dark night on a black ground. I decided that when we came up to the right time when we should have bombed, that we should bomb. There were 400 aircraft behind me coming up, and I really didn't fancy the thought, as Robert said, of circling with 400 aircraft coming on. The risk of collision was a little too great. So perhaps I did the wrong thing, but I said to the bomb aimer, okay, we'll open the bomb doors and get everything ready, so that as soon as we see the first flare go down and we know where the target is, we can drop our bombs and get the hell out of here. It was unhealthy staying over Berlin. I think it had something like 20,000 guns. So it was pretty unhealthy. Now that was probably by my mistake. So I opened the bomb doors, and for the first time on that flight, when we normally flew like this to confuse the enemy radar fighters and guns and things, I flew straight and level for 60 seconds. And in that 60 seconds, the night fighter shot me from the tail to the nose, underneath, firing upwards. He killed the rear gunner, the mid-upper gunner. He knocked out this port engine, knocked it out, tipped it up at an angle, tipped it up. He knocked out all my internal communications. Now, you heard this aeroplane the other day. It's a noisy aeroplane. Can you imagine trying to talk to one another over the noise of 4 engines? We had no communications at all. And he set the bombs on fire. That night I had a 4,000-pound high explosive and 6,000 pounds of magnesium incendiaries. And unfortunately, the incendiaries set the magnesium in the aeroplane also on fire. And so here we were sitting up in the sky at 23,000 feet on 3 engines with no defenses, no communications, and a real beacon in the sky, waiting for the other target, waiting as a target for some other night fighter to attack us. So I dived about 5,000 or 6,000 feet to try and blow out the flames, which is what the record book tells you to do. And of course, as the record book is usually wrong, it never didn't work. And so we stayed. In fact, it did the opposite. It just fanned the flames bigger. So I had a decision to make. And I'm talking to you for some minutes, but all this happened in the space of about 15 seconds. I had to decide as the captain and the pilot of the aircraft, and I was responsible for the crew. All we pilots was responsible for the safety of our crew. Should I attempt to fly to Sweden over the cold Baltic? This was November. The Baltic Sea would be very close to freezing. Should I try and get it down to Switzerland and climb over the mountains, which was equally cold? Should I try and fly it back to England for 4 hours against all the enemy defenses and so on? And I decided, and as I say, in a matter of 11 seconds, you could be surprised what runs through your head quickly when you need to. Now, I thought this was unhealthy, I better get out. So I gave the order to bail out, and the 5 of us who were remaining, the pilot, the engineer, the radio operator, the navigator, and the bomb aimer, we all got out safely and landed as a prisoner of war. And I spent 2 years as a prisoner of war, came home on a stretcher, released by the Russians, as I said. That was another story, I won't go into that. But that was my most outstanding event in World War II.
Thank you, Eric. And Eric was telling me earlier, and I did mention it, that only 5% of crews that bailed out that survived that experience, let alone being a prisoner of war. And our last special honored guest today is Leslie Weeks. Leslie was a gunner, started as an armorer, and ended up aircrew as a gunner. And Leslie, could you please tell us a bit of your experience?
Well, 2 of mine were when I used to do our in air training. I was at this place called El Bala, and we trained on Avro Answers. They also decided there that we would do our dinghy drill on the Suez Canal because it was right alongside the Suez Canal. I don't know who thought of that one, but anyway, that's what they made us do. But this day we were down there doing a dinghy drill. A dinghy in those days was about a 7-foot round dinghy. It was open. There was no cover to it. So it was just supposed to accommodate 7 men, supposed to accommodate the whole crew, right? So we were down there doing this, and all of a sudden somebody shouted out, "Ship coming," looks up the canal. There's this great big ship coming down the canal, and they usually push a kind of a wall of water ahead of them when they're coming down, when they're going through. And the dimensions of the Suez Canal is 100 miles long. It's 100 yards wide and 100 feet deep. It was built by Ferdinand de Lesseps. The statue was at the top end, the Mediterranean end of the canal. But anyway, knowing that this ship was coming down, we had to get out of the way. So we also had canvas paddles that you put over your hand. We only had two. So one guy would be paddling one way, and the other one's supposed to paddle the other way. But the other guy, we were paddling both the same way, so the dinghy was only going round in circles and not moving anywhere. But luckily enough, various distances down the canal, there's these steps that actually go down to the water. So if anything transpires, they're able to get down to water level without having to jump in. So that was one of them. The other one, we were doing a bombing raid on Ferrara. That's near the east coast of Italy on the Adriatic side. And what we used to do, we used to bomb the marshalling yards. The marshalling yards are things where there's a couple of tracks going in and a couple of tracks coming out. And then once the rolling stock got in, then there was all these railroad tracks inside where they could store all the boxcars and stuff like this, okay, loaded with ammunition, bombs, whatever. So we used to close off both ends. We used to do what we called saturation raids. And we used to, having closed off the two ends, the entrance and the exit, we proceeded to drop 500 ton of bombs on what was inside so that we could destroy everything. The purpose of this was to stop the Germans gradually moving all this stuff out and taking it north as our army and our ground forces were pushing them north, pushing them out of Italy. So this was the idea and also the primary need for what we did. But the problem is this night, we were bombing Ferrara on September the 4th in 1944, and we made our run in over the target, and we were coming out, turning around to come home, and the bomber says, Skip, the bombs are still with us. So the skipper said to him, I'll tell you the name of my skipper is William Waterton, but we used to call him Whiskey Waterton because he used to like to drink, you know. So Bombardier said, Skip, the bombs are still with us. So Willie says to him, where were you, out to tea or something like this, you know? So he said, will we make a second run? So Skip said, yeah, we'll make a second run. And so we went in, and like Eric was saying, we went round for a second time, but you've got all these other bombers coming in behind you as well. And, you know, could get into quite a collision with some of them, and guys above you dropping bombs as well. But anyway, we managed to go through. We did the second run, and we were heading for home. And the bombardier pipes up, and this was on a Liberator bomber, by the way. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that, but it was on a Liberator bomber because I was a top gunner on Liberator bombers. The bombardier pipes up, and he says, Skip, the bombs haven't gone. Will we go round again? And because being Australian, he says, not bloody likely, he says, you know. Because, as Eric will tell you, sometimes the fighters used to wait for you coming out so they could grab you, know, with all the searchlights going around. If the searchlights cone you, then you got quite a little job to get away from them. They were pretty good at doing that. And but anyway, eventually, the skipper decided that we would try and get rid of them on the way home. But it took us halfway home before we was able to lose those bombs because they were fixed up there. And one thing about the Liberator, you could stand in the bomb bay, and the bombardier could have a look at it, see what the problem was. But eventually, we did get them away. But when you've got 5 ton of bombs sitting in your belly, you don't really want to take them home. And they didn't think very much of it, taking the bombs home after you've gone all that way using the gas to get them there. So another, right, that's the story now. Another thing is, our guys have gone. There's one thing that we haven't spoken about here, and that is the ground crews. Now, our guys here that look after this plane and our other planes at the museum, they're a really great bunch. And particularly for this plane at the moment, you cannot place a value on their dedication, their enthusiasm, and even their love for keeping this aircraft flying and our other aircraft flying. And we're all volunteers, most of us volunteers. We do all this work. I'm still working full-time. I'm 85. I still come work full-time. And I go up to the museum at weekends, and we work there. We have visitors coming in. We have tours. We have weddings. We have all this sort of thing. But all the guys there that maintain the aircraft, if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be up there. We wouldn't be here. And it was the same during the war. The ground crews put in lots and lots of hours, you know, so that we could fly. And in pretty lousy conditions half the time. Thanks, Rick. That was a good one. This is true. And especially wintertime, If you can imagine working on the engine of one of these in wintertime, outside, very cold, cold metal and that, and working with bare hands, that is really a dedicated person, you know. And our guys here, and I say this, I know they won't like me saying this, but all the guys that look after our aircraft, they are really a great bunch. And also, Dave here, our new chairman, is a great guy as well. And he's been a lot of running us around here, back to where we're billeted, you know, and back to the airport, out to meals, coming back, and, you know. And there's some days here, I think he must be running 24 hours, 24 hours a day. I don't know why, but he is. And thanks, Dave. That's very good. And we appreciate it.
How many Canadians in the audience? British citizens? Any British people here? Australians. I talked to a couple of Australians yesterday. All right, thank you. Any New Zealanders? Any Kiwis? All right, all you veterans, raise your hand. All you veterans. U.S. Thank you all. It takes a second.
Okay. Since we're in business of making compliments and making odds and ends, I'd like to point out a couple of things as well. Our respected chairman, the big guy over here who stands 6'6", was also in the military. He served in the Royal Canadian Air Force, followed on where we left off. We have one of the Lancaster pilots who flies with Gary there. He's also served in the RCAF, and some of the ground crew served in the military. And I like to think that where we finished off, we left in good hands where these guys took over. That's number one. The other point I'd like to make to pick up where Liz was talking is the maintenance of these aircraft at Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum. We have about 25 active aircraft, I think, none of which are less than 50 or 60 years old. Most of the maintenance is done, as Liz has said, by volunteers, but we have 2 or 3 permanent engineers. And if he's here, I hope he's here, is our chief engineer, Dwayne Freeman. Is he here? Where is he? Dwayne? Well, he's a guy he's responsible for keeping 25 aircraft at the average age of 60 years old up in the air, trying to beat our equivalent of your FAA, Transport Canada, in keeping it going.
Don't go away, Dane, just don't go away. Just one other thing. We have a Dakota there in our museum. It is now 66 years old. And now this is the God's honest truth. This aircraft has flown just almost 13 million miles, and we still fly it. And same with this one here, is 61 years old, and we still fly it as well.
Tomorrow at 10 o'clock will be
The course of World War II was governed by massive air power from the very start, and the heavy bomber became the dominant weapon in a new form of total war. The most potent Allied bomber in the European conflict was the British Lancaster.
It was an aircraft that would see you through.
Flying at night, Lancasters pounded the major cities of Nazi Germany into a mass of twisted metal and smoking rubble.
It was truly a wonderful airplane and a major contributor to the victory in the Second World War.
The cost was enormous. Thousands died on the ground and in the air. Of more than 7,000 Lancasters built, almost half were lost.
Watch your height. I'm watching everything. Okay. How many searchlights would you call them? Too many, I reckon. Boy, God, I've never seen anything like this before. Neither have I. Do the pint. Keep your eyes peeled. Yeah.
The bomber first appeared during World War I. These fragile biplanes made of wooden canvas were unable to carry heavy bomb loads or do much damage, but they left a deep impression on the military designers and planners. During the 1920s and early 1930s, European governments became convinced that bombers would dominate any future war. Yet Britain was slow to modernize its air force, and many of its aircraft designs were obsolete before they left the drawing board. Germany did not make the same mistake. In 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power, determined to create a new German superstate, the Third Reich. He had once begun a huge rearmament program. Hitler created a modern air force. Its chief weapon was to be the bomber. Within a few short years, Germany was openly preparing for war. The British government had realized the impending danger and launched an urgent program to re-equip the Royal Air Force. They turned to aircraft designers like Roy Chadwick. He had joined the Avro Company in 1911 as a draftsman and steadily worked his way to the top. Chadwick was a visionary who combined the precision of an engineer with the eye of an artist.
He was tall and slender, and I remember him in dark overcoats when in his young days, with white silk scarf he would have knotted. He had big brown eyes and an olive face and dark hair, and he was elegant. He liked kind of elegant things, and I think that is translated into his machines.
Roy Chadwick had a passion for his work and never stopped worrying about how to improve his designs.
It was winter, and the curtains would be drawn. He was sitting in the room after his evening meal, was quietly there, with the Manchester Evening News, and he would fold it over and I'd see he'd do the crossword puzzle. And then I might go to say goodnight, Daddy, and give him a kiss, and I'd see all round the edges of the Manchester Evening News all the calculations. He was doing two things at once.
The ministry wanted an aircraft which would carry up to 8,000 pounds of bombs, fly round trips of 2,000 miles, and do it all with only 2 engines. It was a very tall order which could have defeated a lesser talent, but Roy Chadwick rose to the challenge.
I asked him once, how do you design an aeroplane, Daddy? And he said, well, I think of all the parts first and then I sit down to do the design.
Chadwick designed his bomber around a massively strong central section in the shape of a cross. It was formed by the 2 wing spars bolted at right angles to a pair of girders, forming the roof of a huge bomb bay. After months of painstaking work, the plans were ready. Every single component had been designed and drawn, down to the last nut and bolt. Roy Chadwick named his bomber in honor of Avro's hometown, Manchester. In the summer of 1937, the Air Ministry placed an urgent order for 200 Manchesters. Even though the prototype had not yet been tested, it was a huge gamble. But everybody now expected a war. It was simply a matter of when. A growing mood of panic swept the country. Londoners began building aero shelters, gas masks were issued, and the public were instructed on what to do.
If you are provided with a steel shelter and have not erected it, do so at once. Always keep your gas mask handy in the house. When you hear the warning signals, take cover at once.
In September 1939, the fragile peace collapsed. Britain was at war with Germany. As Europe was overrun, cities like Warsaw and Rotterdam were devastated by German bombers. Then, in September 1940, Hitler finally unleashed his bombers on London. The Blitz had begun, and Londoners found themselves in the front line.
There was a lot of shrapnel coming down, pitter-pattering on the roof and all that kind of thing, and it was scary. I mean, incendiary bombs dropped in our garden. My best pal was there with us at the time, and it was then that we decided we wanted to join up. That particular night, actually.
The German attack soon spread to other British cities. In one devastating raid, the central of Coventry was almost completely wiped out. The aim was to terrify and demoralize the civilian population into accepting the defeat. The effect was to unite them in a single-minded quest for revenge. And that meant bombing German cities.
I used to come home on leave and see all the people going down into the underground shelters in London, you know, sleeping down there night after night, and I used to think to myself, you know, this is terrible. But I used to get a sense of pride then. Well, thank God we're hitting back.
More bombers was the slogan. Bombers began to appear, not in dozens, but in hundreds. And Germany began to get what was coming to her. For the first time, we carried the war into the Nazi camp.
But in the early stages of the war, the bombing campaign caused little damage. Most of the aircraft were too small to carry an effective bomb load. And without electronic navigation equipment, the bombers' crews often missed their targets by many miles.
Bomber Command was simply incapable of hitting any targets, much less precision targets. They probably killed more cows and blew up more trees and damaging any portion of the German landscape that mattered. They thought that they were waging a precision bombing campaign. They simply weren't.
If the bombing campaign was to be effective, Britain urgently needed two things: accurate navigation aids and effective long-range heavy bomber.
Of considerable aid to the Royal Air Force is the big twin-engine bomber known as the Manchester. They carry a heavy bomb load at a high speed, thanks to the Rolls-Royce Vulture engines, and they have a powerful defensive armament.
The hopes were high as Roy Chadwick's Manchester finally entered service in Bomber Command. But behind the brave words, the truth was much less encouraging. Although Chadwick's airframe design was sound, the problem lay with the complex and unreliable Vulture engines. The plane would struggle to get airborne with a full bomb load and regularly failed in mid-flight.
It just did not work. And they couldn't get the heights and anything, and it was a horrible plane.
The official verdict was finally delivered from the Air Ministry. Avro would complete the initial order for 200 Manchesters and then switch to building a rival design. For Roy Chadwick, it was a bitter blow, but he would not be beaten. He knew that his bomber could still be a winner. Somehow he had to prove it, and prove it fast. The decision by the British Air Ministry to abandon production of the Avro Manchester bomber forced Roy Chadwick to rethink its design. He saw that what it needed was a bigger set of wings and a lot more power. He decided to remove the 2 unreliable Vulture engines in favor of 4 Merlin engines. The Merlin was an outstanding design, which already powered the famous Spitfire and Hurricane fighters of the RAF. After persuading the Air Ministry to give him one last chance, Chadwick went back to the drawing board.
In the tracing office, they work with pencil and ruler. But without this work, the giant bomber could not begin to take shape.
He told everybody, keep it simple. He always said, if it looks right, it is right.
The enlarged wings and their new engines were fitted, extra fuel tanks were installed, and the aircraft was rolled out into the light of day.
He said to me this day, would you like to come with me? We're going to test a new machine. Of course, I went. Captain Sam Brown, the test pilot, took it up. It was wonderful to see it overhead. And he maneuvered it round, all banking and turning. I'd never seen such a big machine. Then he came back and landed, and everybody at one accord rushed across the field, and someone called up to him, how did it go, Sam? And he said, oh, it was marvellous. So light on the controls, so easy to handle. We got back into the car and were driving home. And I remember actually saying to my father, well, Daddy, you must be very pleased. And he said, well, I am, darling. But in this business, no one can afford to rest on their laurels.
The flight certificate, duly signed by Roy Chadwick, carried a new name for the test aircraft: the Lancaster. The machine suddenly looked and felt right. The problems that had plagued the Manchester were quickly forgotten, as the glowing reports of the test pilots confirmed Roy Chadwick's faith in his design.
This is the weapon upon which the Allies based tremendous hopes. To the people who built the Lancasters, each doing his own task to the best of his ability, their success came as no surprise.
Soon, the Lancaster bomber would become a household name. For one man, it would become the key to victory. Early in 1942, Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris was appointed Commander-in-Chief of Britain's Bomber Command. He was an aggressive leader with a single-minded determination to destroy the German war machine.
Press on your attack. If you individually succeed, you will have delivered the most devastating blow against the very vitals of the enemy. Let him have it right on the chin. Send that message to all groups and stations.
Bomber Harris did a marvellous job. He was brought in when Bomber Command was at a real low ebb.
Harris knew that the accurate bombing of strategic targets was almost impossible. In a controversial decision, he supported plans to adopt the German policy of area bombing. Like Hitler's Luftwaffe, the RAF would saturate major centers of population with bombs. And its chief weapon, which Harris called the shining sword in the hands of Bomber Command, would be the Lancaster.
And here's the bomb rack, which can open up with 8 tons of trouble for Hitler. It's 33 feet long. When it's released its load, another 2 or 3 acres of Germany will never be the same again.
The Lancaster soon became the undisputed heavyweight champion of the British bomber force. As it proved its worth in combat, fresh orders poured into the Avro factories.
We got a new aircraft, and on the side it was HWH, and at that time there was a film called Hell's a Poppin'. Right, okay lads, this is Hell's a Poppin'. So I got some yellow paint, I climbed onto the wing and I painted Hell's a Poppin' all the way up. Hell's a Poppin' it was. It was a lucky aircraft for us.
For many, the Lancaster quickly became far more than just a machine. It was alive, and so all its male crew. The Lanc was definitely a lady.
It was love at first sight. There she was, and she was standing up on these long legs, and a black beauty. Funnily enough, I didn't feel that there was any rivalry with the rest of the crew. You know, I felt she was my girlfriend, and we all felt that it was our girlfriend. You know.
It took a crew of 7 to fly a Lancaster: the pilot, flight engineer, navigator, bomb aimer, wireless operator, and 2 gunners.
The most forward position was the bomb aimer, who was lying down in the bomb position. And if necessary, he manned the front gun. And the skipper was on the port side. Next to him was the flight engineer's position. Then you had the curtains, and the navigator sat behind those, so he could have his lights on his charts. The wireless operator was behind him. And then you went back over the main spar, and then you had the mid-upper gunner, and then you had the tail gunner. If any one of you didn't do your job, well, that was it. The whole lot of you went.
You live and sleep and eat together. You go out together. They rely on you, and you rely on them.
The pilot in Bomber Command was always the skipper, irrespective of rank. And even if the group captain, the CO of the squadron, flew with me, I was in charge.
You weren't just a crew of 7. You'd got the ground crew. The ground crew were the boys who got that aircraft so that it would bring you back. And we had a terrific ground crew we had. We'd do anything for them, and they'd do anything for us.
The ground staff, who watched and waited back at the base, played a vital role in supporting as the bomber crews risked their lives over enemy territory. In the control tower, they anxiously plotted the course of each raid. They only knew too well that with every Lancaster posted as missing, another 7 men would not be coming back that night.
The Avro Lancaster, most powerful and efficient bomber in the world, and one of the most important war-winning weapons yet devised by the United Nations. The Lancaster is a name that is writing war history.
Although Chadwick had designed the Lancaster for mass production, it was still a monumental task. Each aircraft contained some 55,000 separate parts, involving roughly 500,000 engineering operations.
He had designed the Lancaster in 5 sections so that it could be made in all the different factories and then brought together. And with this simplification, they were able to put it together quickly and simply, and so much so that at the height, I think it was 1943, 150 Lancasters a month were being produced.
Meet a few of the ordinary, hard-working people devoted to this important task. Angela Roberts, a capstan operator. Maisie Rafferty at a press. Dobson Hind and his mate, Joan Evans, riveting. Every pilot of a Lancaster is confident that he's handling an aircraft into which has gone not only superb designing, but the proud craftsmanship of an experienced army of workers.
It's everything you wanted in a heavy bomber. It had got the strength, the speed, the maneuverability. Its weight carrying capacity was out of this world.
It took eventually 6 tons more than it had been designed for. Sir Arthur Harris said it was the camel that never knew the last straw.
In our training, we used to cut 2 engines on one side, and you could stand the Lancaster on its wingtip with 2 engines cut on one side. Marvellous aircraft.
I think the Lancaster was the finest bomber in the European theater of operations. It was truly a wonderful airplane and a major contributor to the victory in the Second World War.
By 1943, the Allies were equipped with enough heavy bombers to launch an all-out offensive against Nazi Germany. It was to be a 24-hour round-the-clock operation, the Americans bombing by day, the British by night. Electronic navigation systems were introduced, and the bombing became more accurate. Radio direction finders and radar scanners were installed in selected aircraft, and their hand-picked crews were given special training as pathfinders. It all came together at the end of July 1943, when a series of heavy raids on the city of Hamburg demonstrated the devastating effect of area bombing. Thousands died in the inferno as huge areas of the city were utterly destroyed. Area bombing had not broken the British resolve to fight, but Arthur Harris still remained firmly convinced that this was the only way to defeat Nazi Germany. They sowed the wind, he said. Now they are going to reap the whirlwind. As the scale of the operation steadily increased, so did the weight of bombs falling on Germany.
One of the great contributions of the Lancaster in the Second World War is its capacity to carry extraordinarily large bombs. The power of those weapons were such, when combined with accuracy, that you could really wreck big targets.
For 12 months, British scientists were working day and night on one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the war, the 12,000-pounder. And here it is, over 5.5 tons of concentrated destruction, the biggest bomb yet known in air warfare.
Lancasters eventually carried no less than 22,000 pounds. The 10-ton Grand Slam bomb. But most raids involved more conventional loads. The crews knew in advance what bombs they would be carrying. What remained a mystery was the night's intended target. One clue was the fuel load.
If they said, oh, it's only 1150 gallons, you think, it's a short one. But normally it was 2154, that was full tanks. So that was a long one.
As dusk was falling, the air crews would go to their briefing. Only then would their target be revealed.
When you entered, of course, there was a big curtain up over the whole map of Europe, you see. And that curtain was only drawn back when the CO walked in to tell you what the target was for that particular night.
There'd be a huge wall map with a piece of ribbon marking the route that you'd be taking to the target. The first thing everybody looked at was where the end of the ribbon was.
You now know precisely the next item on that list. Martin job.
Now the tension began steadily mounting as 0 hour approached.
I used to go to NAFI and always write my last letter. Obviously you can't post it, and it goes in your locker. And if you shouldn't return, that letter would be taken out of your locker and sent to the family.
The average number of ops, missions, or whatever you want to call them, we call them ops, was 7.5. After you did over 7.5, you were living on somebody else's borrowed time. You had 1 week's leave every 6. There was a block of 6 of you, and anybody on that got the chop or didn't come back. The name was taken off the list. Everybody moves up one underneath. The new crew go to the bottom. So sometimes, in a heavy time, you would go 3 weeks and you'd get another week's leave because 3 of the bods above you got the chop.
A great friend of mine, Sergeant Ellsworthy, he was on his 28th trip and he didn't come back.
Ellsworthy's fiancée had already lost a previous boyfriend who had also been a pilot. Now, she turned to Laurie for consolation, and the friendship soon blossomed into a romance. But Laurie's superstitious crew did not approve of the match.
So I had to drop her. The crew said, "You will drop her, Skip." She was a jinx. Poor girl. Very nice looking girl, too.
But for the skipper of a Lancaster in love, as in war, the welfare of his crew always came first. They had to believe their luck would hold as they set off for Germany.
You were at the beginning of an adventure. You were at the beginning of something dangerous. You were at the beginning of fear, and you would feel fear. And anyone who said they didn't feel fear were liars or nuts.
As the Lancaster crews were driven out of their aircraft, each man only knew too well how dangerous their mission was. Superstition and ritual could not guarantee a safe return. But then again, perhaps they could.
I always wore a green scarf with little Chinese markings on them, which my sister had given me. She says, "You might need this scarf."
I got married 3 days before D-Day. I had a silk stocking from the wife. I tied that round my neck. I never took that silk stocking off until I'd finished ops. I showered with it. I did everything. It was my lucky charm, was that silk stocking.
Well, 2 of the crews from the squadron were given dolls by a young girl who used to knit them as lucky mascots.
I carried that doll on all the trips I did. I swear blind that that mascot brought me back.
You talk about the smell of an aircraft. It had that smell of comfort, and that puts it all in one word. That was home from home.
Once you get into your seat, of course, you check all your various meters, pumps, gauges. Once we're all satisfied that everything's in working order, we get the order to move, and then we move off. You had to synchronize your engines. But once you had them synchronized, they just purr. Music to the ears.
The sound of 4 Merlins is something you wish is beautiful.
Weighed down with the bombs and fuel, the heavy bombers would line up, waiting their turn to thunder down the runway and take to the air.
This is the moment of no return. This is where the decision's been made. This is where you're in her world, and suddenly it all seems to happen. You've got a full bomb bay, and you've got full power, and suddenly she's let go. I mean, that moment, it's unbelievable. And you roar down the runway, and all you can hear is the noise, and it's a beautiful noise. You've got 1,400 yards to lift about 14,000 pounds. It starts to seem that she's going to lose the game against gravity. But just after halfway, you feel that gentle bounce, and then another gentle bounce. And suddenly, thump, and you're weightless, you're airborne. It's moments like that she tells you what she's all about. And she's just magnificent, just magnificent. She is not it is magnificent, she.
And now, as our Lancaster takes to its element, think again of the importance of every item in its construction. The successful accomplishment of the job it has been assigned to may depend on one of the smallest parts. The lives of its crew, too.
You felt safe in a Lanc somehow. When all around you're going mad, you're somewhere safe. You always thought, if anything happens, it'll happen to the other bloke, not to you.
We were going to do a full tour. We weren't going to get shot down. That happened to other people. We weren't going to get shot down, no.
It's always somebody else that gets it, never you, until you get it.
As the bomber formation reached the enemy coast, the mission entered its most dangerous phase. Ahead lay the batteries of deadly anti-aircraft guns and the night fighters of the Luftwaffe. But the only sound that reached the crew members was the reassuring drone of the Merlin engines.
You had this sort of rhythmic sound of the Merlins there, you know, and somehow that was warm and comforting. And you weren't thinking then, God, will we ever get there and get back again? Because you had utter confidence in them.
You just felt we're going into it now, and everybody alert. I used to pass orders round. Gunners, keep your eyes skinned.
Isolated in his turret, the rear gunner had barely enough room to move. Most attacks came from the rear, and he was often the first casualty.
It was a vulnerable position, I can't deny that, but not one you could shy away from. That's the job you were there to do, and you did it.
Tailing Charlie, as we called him, he was the fall guy. I think there were more casualties with rear gunners than any of the other crew members.
As they reached the target, the bombers had to fly through a dense barrage of exploding shells from the German flak batteries.
I would say it takes a lot to make me afraid, but I was scared. Really scared at times. Frightened to death. My God, this is it. This is my time coming. I've only had 19 years. I'm on the chop.
You are frightened, you are scared, and you just hope that you will come back.
You had a lot of other things to think about than fear. And I must say that over the target, it was exciting. And excitement was over fear then.
Bombing was right, Skipper. Target's in sight. I'm ready for the bombing run. And then it's all quiet in the aircraft because he is in sole charge and you do exactly what he says.
You actually go out there to hit a target. The fact that civilians may be killed, you've got to blank that out. The most important thing was to get the correct wind speed and direction.
It's sheer hell, anything from about 15 to 30 seconds. Seems like 15 to 30 hours.
And under your breath, you're saying, for God's sake, drop the bloody things.
Get rid of these bombs now. Just get them away.
You just go up like this. It's amazing. I mean, you go up like from one floor to the 10th floor in the car park. You vroom.
And as soon as he says, bomb's gone, I throw the aircraft over and get the hell out of there.
The first thing is to hang on for grim death.
At last, they could take evasive action to avoid the fighters and head for home.
You'd see a flash, 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 flash. Oh, quite clearly. And it's remarkable how fast an explosion travels. It goes out very, very quickly, 100 yards, 200 yards each way.
Going back, because I was at the back, I always felt if somebody wanted to grab you, in the darkness, they want to grab you back for what you've done.
Back in England, other hands were reaching out, willing the Lancasters to return in the safety of their home base.
They were so close to us that they were almost brothers as well. They wanted us to come back. Because they have this long piece of string and they would let you go. They'd bring you back again, So you were tied to them.
But for the pilot and his crew, the long night was not over yet. German fighters still prowled the skies over Europe, waiting for the moment to attack. And the bombers was still a very long way from home.
The first bombers have dropped their incendiaries and ringed the target. Each speck of light a blazing German building. Easy enough to realize the catastrophe, the concentrated chaos that is overwhelming the city below.
As they set course for home, the crew could not let down their guard for a second. German night fighters continued to attack the bombers relentlessly all the way across occupied Europe.
See the flames and you watch the parachutes coming out. I can remember my skipper used to shout at us and say, "Pay attention, this could be you next."
The gunner suddenly called out, "There's a Ju-88 coming in, skipper." I said, "Okay, give me your orders as soon as you can, what to do." But he's in charge then. And he said, "Prepare to port, prepare to dive port, prepare to dive port, prepare for dive." And as he said that, we were hit. And he also fired at that time. As I put the aircraft over to go port down, I saw the tracer go underneath me. Then I went into a screaming dive to port. And at the same time, of course, there were screams from the rear gunner and the mid-upper gunner. They'd both been hit. I said to the flight engineer, "Bill, give me a hand with this control column." Eventually, I got out of the dive. I was down to about 6,000 feet then. And of course, I relaxed and whipped over again into another dive, you see. It's the same way. We pulled out at about 2,000 feet, and immediately I saw a bit of cloud, and I dived into it.
The fighter had vanished, but the Lancaster was badly damaged and almost impossible to control. That part of the wing was missing. The fuselage was riddled with holes, and both gunners were seriously wounded.
I asked my navigator to set a course, and I said, "I can't turn to starboard at all, because I had full right rudder on and full control column like this." And that's how we were flying back. All the time I was drifting slowly to port.
After 2 hours of fighting with the controls, they reached the English coast and prepared for an emergency landing.
The scary part was, are the wheels going to come down? Because we didn't know whether the hydraulics were working, you see. And it was then I said to the crew, "If any of you want to jump now," the gunners are staying with me. They had no choice. They said, "Don't worry, Skip. We're staying with you." I thought the best thing to do so she doesn't flip over is to land at a faster speed. You just sat back and thought, Godfathers, we've done it.
You get out and you pat it and say, "Thanks." Right, you'll say a piece of metal's lifeless. It is lifeless. But when it's put together with lots of other pieces of metal as a lank, it's alive. It's just asleep, waiting for the next night.
But the Lancaster was not immortal, and its next trip could always prove to be its last, as it was for so many other crew members. The odds of them surviving a full tour of 30 operations were very low.
You go to bed, and then when you wake up, you find that the opposite beds 7 are empty, and you may see the adjutant coming in emptying the lockers, and you know then that particular crew didn't make it back.
We just didn't see them again, and you saw these empty bunks. Well, they are. And then we all lost friends, perhaps on other squadrons. I lost 2 very good friends. I often miss them.
50% of bomber air crew were killed. And if you add the training accidents and people who lost training, it works out roughly about 6 out of every 10.
And in Germany, the cost was even higher. Hundreds of thousands were killed or made homeless as the nation, which had once seemed invincible, was steadily reduced to rubble.
No matter how messy the bomber offensive was, it was absolutely essential portion of winning of the war. Without the strategic bombing offensive, one can project an Allied victory, but maybe at the cost of another 2 or 3 million lives of Allied soldiers, and perhaps the war continuing into 1946.
But after the war, the destruction of Germanic cities became a controversial issue, and an episode which many preferred to forget. Today, there are few memorials to the men of the Bomber Command.
As far as I'm concerned, we had every right to bomb these places. In view of what Hitler not only had done to Britain, what he'd done to Warsaw, Rotterdam, well, wherever he invaded, they went in and destroyed everything they could.
After the war was finished, we used to go on trips to have a look at the damage that was done, you know, Cologne and all those places. Much the same as we suffered over in this country, obviously. But even then, that's you looked at it and you thought, was all that necessary? Was there not another way of sorting this out?
But Air Marshal Sir Arthur Harris has no doubts about the bombing policy, or about which aircraft made it possible. Writing to Roy Chadwick, he said, "Without your genius and your effort, we would not have prevailed. The Lancaster was the greatest single factor in winning the war."
We've always got to have a designer before we can have a pilot. The man who contributes something like the Lancaster. That's an enormous thing. And that must be the job satisfaction to end all job satisfactions, mustn't it? And that lives forever. My young nephews don't say, my uncle was in the Air Force. They say, my uncle was on Lancs. That's Roy's tribute.
But the Lancaster could never have played its part in the victory without the thousands of brave young men who fought and died in the skies over Germany.
There's a hell of a lot of lads who've paid for my privilege to still be alive today. A lot of young men have paid the price, the ultimate sacrifice, so that I've got children, I've got grandchildren. I'm very, very lucky. I really am very, very lucky.
I volunteered and became a messenger boy in the ARP, and that was before the war started, and the people used to laugh at us with dropping our bags of flour in the middle of the road and shunting people out of their houses. And I lost my father, so I have a mother and brother and sister. And when the war started, of course, I'd be seeing them down into the air raid shelters and then go off on my rusty bike and wheel around the houses doing my messenger job. So I suppose I was very much into the war effort then. And it was, like a lot of things subsequently, I suppose, exciting and a bit frightening. I mean, going around the streets with your old bike and bits of shrapnel dropping around, I suppose, with the prelude to something else, really. But that was my sort of entry into the feeling of the war, certainly. Well, not really. I suppose it was a sort of devil-may-care bit, and the RAF boys seemed to be in my sort of image, and I wanted to do those things with the scarf flying around the neck and so on, rather than digging trenches, I guess. So really it seemed to be horses for courses for me. I never thought twice about Army, Navy or Air Force. But by the time I'd got to volunteering, I mean, one thing was perfectly clear in my mind, regardless of any feelings about those earlier bombings I mentioned. It was clear in my mind that we had a fellow and a Reich who were stealing, invading every country, and they had concentration camps, and they were dealing with atrocities, and there was only one answer, and that was to get in when you could and do something about it. My ideas were quite formulated then in that way, certainly more than when I was 14. Well, I remember it as clearly as daylight, and I can remember how I felt. And I felt, as I just said, so far as previous encounters were concerned, they were just limited to snapshots and photos and things. And yet there was still something there. And you could even feel there that there was something more than a machine. But I was up at OTU in Kinloss in Scotland, and some Lancasters came over from somewhere south, and they were going to the north of Norway for some naval targets. And they put down with us, I think probably to refuel, because going on a bit of a journey. And they stayed with us overnight. And this particular Lanc was behind the mess and on dispersal, very close. And knowing what I'd thought about, I really had to get to her as quickly as possible. I went over, and there's no doubt about it, it sounds a bit balmy, but it was love at first sight. She was absolutely fantastic. And she was far more than I'd ever seen in these pictures, which, as I said, were gliding through the sky and so on, because there she was, and she seemed enormous. She was standing up on these long legs, you know, and a black beauty. And you could sense it. I mean, the motors weren't going, but you could sense that she herself, even without the Merlins, was powerful, big and powerful, and she could do any job, it seemed. And I suppose I likened it to a sleeping beauty, I suppose, who needed the kiss of a Merlin to make her burst into life or into our lives or something like that. But we were then on the threshold, and I think perhaps that made it even more evocative. I think we were at OTU, which was the training unit before you went on to heavy conversion. So you finished with your twin engines there, and so we hadn't been on any 4-engine. And then once you had the short period at heavy conversion, you were on to Lanc. So she was just around the corner. So that moment is one that'll stick with me for always. Yes, it wasn't true, but it was my first girlfriend. In fact, it was true, I think, because to a certain extent, you see, let's take an average person, you get 3, 4, 5 girlfriends, perhaps, you know, it's the nature of life, and not very often does it happen that you get the first one and she's the one for life. And so you get several girlfriends. But she was my first girlfriend because she was the first one that really meant everything. She seemed to have everything that I wanted at that time. I don't mean I wanted X, Y, Z out of a human girl. It's just that around that time, with the Air Force, with the war, with going into the Air Force, with going up in a plane and so on, she got all this to offer. And to me, going back to the feeling of a human aura anyway, yes, she was my girlfriend. And I take her, and I took her as my girlfriend. And funnily enough, I didn't feel that there was any rivalry with the rest of the crew. You know, I felt she was my girlfriend, and we all felt that it was our girlfriend, you know. And I suppose that's an extension of the fantastic spirit you had in the crew. But she was my first girlfriend. Two things about the regulations and how, and this was part of the fun of being on the squadron, if you can call it fun, and there was fun, as well as all the serious side. And that was when we used to, after we'd had our briefing, we'd go out and get ourselves togged up in all these bloody great things and boots and everything, and then get in the lorry, and away it would go. And there was this precious moment when we used to go through the gates, and there was the service police in their hut. And of course, they were all bastards, and we all hated them, you see. And there they were out there. And the one time they allowed this thing to go by the board, we all had our gear on. Of course, we had the top of our battle dresses there. And in here, because it was handy if you came down in the sea, you always had your aircrew whistle. So it's next to your mouth to whistle for your position. So you had this ready. And every time we went past the hut on the way to ops, and they knew we were going to ops, and they knew they didn't want to be in our position. And when we went past, we all of us blasted these things and all gave them this, which I mean, you dare do when you were back on the coast. Not doing. And of course, they, for their part, who would have been, what are you saying, Airman? You know, but they stood to attention and saluted. And they went past and they saluted, and we gave them 2 fingers. And to my mind, that epitomized the sort of feeling in a drone, really at the harsh end of it, the military police, and at the other end of it, what the drone was all about. And for that moment, you know, we respected each other. That was fantastic. Well, first of all, of course, coming towards a target, I mean, we've been going quite a way now. And don't forget this, that if it's a 10-hour journey, you've been going for 5 hours and watching everything. And each one has been doing his job, you know. So you're not exactly as bright and alert, but you suddenly sharpen up. I mean, you suddenly, if there's a slight, there's no real tiredness by then, you're young, you know, but it's still 5 hours of hardish work. And so in my case, my work would be listening, as I mentioned, and then watching for fighters predominantly. I mean, I also had to watch for collisions. That was a sad thing to think of, but you had to, particularly over the North Sea, where they're all coming back together or going out together, and where we were milling around the first point, the first turning point at the beginning of the journey, which was near Reading, and the stream would be very close. So you had to watch for it, and they did happen, and quite a few people were killed in collisions. So one's watching that, and one's watching predominantly the point you mentioned for fighters and so on. And when you're, it all depends, I don't know how far, but it must be probably an hour or 3/4 of an hour. You see that the pathfinders and perhaps the beginning of the stream have started to hit the target. So you see the targets blazing, and you know where it's going, and you don't need a navigator's set then to be able to find the target. And so it's then, funnily enough, I suppose, just for a second then I get this fear. But it's no longer than a second, because you've been so keen on watching everything, and then the next second after your fear, whatever it is, you're watching again. And I think I mention this purely because we discussed fear, but it's momentary, because you realize that from that second onwards, when you're seeing it and you're really within its orbit, that means the target, that from in, over and out, you've got to be total observation thick, meaning I don't mean thick up here, I mean you had to be as keen as possible in outlook. And so the first thing you're thinking of are the fighters. So as you go in, you're keen on the fighters all the way. The boys in the front start taking over more as we get near the target, of course, and the navigator leading you in, and you can hear your mates over the intercom, and you can hear the navigator and pilot taking over, and then the bomber and the pilot. So all this time you're spending your time, I'm speaking purely of me, not the rest of the crew, in searching for aircraft. And there's not much point in searching for anti-aircraft, because they'll shoot it up anyway. So you just keep your fingers crossed for that. You search a bit, depends on the place, whether they've got many searchlights. Some places have more than others. So you search for that, because that is something you've got to divert from. So you'll search, and by this time you're practically there. And then, of course, it's simply a two-man act. It's the pilot and the bomber. And by that time, you can almost feel the warmth of the target, you know. And you're going over, and of course, you're tending to look up there more because you're conscious of this silhouette business. And as they go over the target, then the boys are completely taking over the aircraft. And it's left, right, steady, and then bombs away, and you just go up like this. It's amazing. I mean, you go up like from one floor to the 10th floor in the car park. You boom! It's absolutely bloody fun. No lift does it. I like it, you know. But 14,000 pounds just hanging on you, and suddenly goes, you know, boom, and up you are like this. And then the next second, you know, whatever the pilot says, something all sorts, you know, fuck off. Oh, sorry, I'll bugger off your, or all sorts of things. But it's go, you see. So you corkscrew. And then when they corkscrew, the first thing is to hang on for grim death, because he's corkscrewing like this, you see, which is a standard. It's a standard regulation. And of course, it's ultra effective. It's one thing that's never had to change. From early days to the end of the war, it never changed, because it's first class, because you go left and then you're going right and then you're dropping and then you're rising. You're doing everything to counteract. And it's hell to try to combat that as an air gunner or as a fighter trying to bring you down. Very, very difficult. So that goes on for quite a while until you're fairly sure that you're away from the target area. And also there's no one on your tail. There might be someone. We were just out and one came on our tail. Well, that was different. And I mean, that's a different story. But boom, 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 and you're out again. So coming back to your feelings, no fear at all as you're going near to it. You've got too much to do. And when you dive out of it, again, it's too much to do. You have no time to, I think the reason if you had no time to think of fear, it's probably there, but you haven't got any time. And I really found it all exciting. I must say grudgingly that it was bloody exciting. The whole lot was exciting. And even watching for these guys was exciting, you know. When you actually saw one as we did, or saw three, it's slightly different when they're on your tail. But no, and even then it was exciting. I didn't fear any fear then. It was really exciting. So does that answer your question? Well, as I told you, and this is the most famous part of any raid, because when you're sweating bricks, because you're absolutely dead, you're straight, and you've got to go over the target, and you've got to be absolutely spot on, and the bomb aimer is in charge, and the pilot does his wish, hence Lanc does his wish. And he says left, left, steady, right, right, steady, left, left, steady, 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 left, left, steady. And then the joke is back a bit, which of course you can never do. Sorry about that. But that is the joke of Bomber Command, back a bit. And, you know, that is a moment. That is a moment of all times, I think.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.